My name is Margaret Foster. I am 67 years old. I teach children. I taught for 43 years. I love the small hands. I love the wide eyes. I love the simple questions. Teaching was my life. I also had pancreatic cancer. I fought it for 14 months. The pain grew. The treatment stopped helping. 3 days before this day, the doctors told me they could do no more. They gave me their faces of soft words. They gave me time to choose. That morning, I signed the papers to end life support. I chose hospice for the next day. I chose to die surrounded by the people I love. I chose how I would spend my final hours. I chose joy over sorrow. I woke that morning with a quiet in my chest. The sky in Nashville was pale and kind. My daughter Carol slept on the sofa. My grandchildren ran errands. My phone buzzed with messages that felt both ordinary and sacred. I dressed slow. I put on the dress I wore to graduations and class plays. I wrapped my grandmother's locket around my neck. I told myself I would not spend my last day in a hospital bed. I would not fill it with goodbyes only. I would make it a small celebration. I wanted to give my family one bright day to hold in their hands. I wanted one last lesson in living for my students and my grandchildren. Family Feud felt right. I had watched the show for years. I loved how it made people laugh. I loved how it pulled families close. I called the producer a week before and said simply, "I want to be on your show." They asked why. I told them, "I want a day of light." My Nashville clan came with me. Carol, my kids, my grandkids. We drove to Atlanta early. The car smelled like cinnamon and peppermint from the candies I handed out. We joked on the highway. We argued about song choices. We practiced answers like it was rehearsing for a school play. Laughter came easy between us. That was the plan. Backstage at the studio, the lights were loud. Hair and makeup hummed around us. The other family, the Colemans from Birmingham, warmed up with loud banter. Steve Harvey walked past in his crisp suit. He looked like a man who knew how to make an ordinary moment feel grand. My hands felt small when I held the cue card. The makeup artist smoothed the powder on my cheek like she was tucking an old photograph into an album. My family fussed over me with the tenderness I had taught them to give others. Carol adjusted my scarf, plucked at my sleeve. My granddaughter offered a water bottle like it was a magic potion. I wanted the show to be normal. I wanted to play. I wanted to laugh. I did not want pity. I did not want the cameras to hunt my last hours. I wanted this day to be about who I had been, not who I was leaving behind. When the director called names and lined us up, I felt the nerves that teachers know before the first day of school. It was an old, good feeling. I breathed. I reminded myself of the children I had taught who once trembled before a spelling bee. This was like that. This was a lesson in courage. We walked onto the stage. The audience noise washed over me. The lights warmed my face. Steve welcomed us with that booming voice that fills a room and makes you feel seen. He asked where we were from. I said Nashville. He asked about our family. We laughed. The game began. The first rounds passed like pages. My family played well. My voice chimed in with answers. I gave the same kind of encouragement I had given students for decades. "Good job," I would whisper. "Nice try," I would smile. The crowd responded to our easy rhythm. I watched my grandchildren beam when Steve teased them. Their joy was like sunshine. Between rounds, I sat knotted with a secret that did not belong to the camera. I felt the weight of time and choice and the small, quiet courage that had led me here. I did not want my family to unravel under the truth. They already carried the shock of the diagnosis. I wanted to give them this day intact. During a break, the producer came by with questions about the next round. I said I wanted the show to stay normal. He nodded. He told me Steve liked guests who carried warmth. I nodded back, but my pulse moved faster than his words. My heart kept pulling me toward a truth I had decided to hold close. I had taught children how to mark their papers with a neat hand. I had taught them how to stand tall and speak their names. I had taught them the value of a single bright day. Today, in a strange loop of fate, I would be the pupil learning from my own lesson. I kept my secret like a folded note in my pocket. My family knew I was sick. They did not know I was leaving tomorrow. They had called me brave, They had called me stubborn. They had argued about hospice rooms and final calls. For days, they packed the car with comfort and quiet prayers. For tonight, I wanted to wrap them in laughter. One commercial break stretched longer than the others. The band played a cheerful tune and the crew shuffled. I felt a small need rise in my chest. I rose from my seat and walked toward the stage edge. Steve was nearby, talking with his crew. I tapped his arm gently. He looked down with that familiar blunt kindness. "Mr. Harvey," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. "May I have a word?" He leaned in. His face changed in a way I had not expected. It softened. He asked, "What is it, ma'am?" I swallowed and told him the truth. I told him about the papers. I told him about hospice at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I told him I wanted my last day to be full of laughter and family, not tears. He did not react with the briskness of a man who takes orders. He reacted like a man who hears a child say she wants to paint the sky red. He quieted. His eyes looked at me the way they do when a story arrives with gravity. He asked gently if my family knew. I told him they knew I was fading, but not that I had chosen tomorrow. I did not want the last hours overwritten with sorrow. He listened as if every word were a seed. He asked only one thing. "What do you want from me?" I looked at him and told him, "Keep the show normal. Let us have this day. Let joy be loud." He placed a hand on my shoulder like an old friend. He said then, soft and sure, "I will do my best." We walked back to our seats. The cameras rolled again. Steve's manner changed in a way that felt intimate. He greeted us with extra tenderness. He made jokes that landed like warm blankets. When our family answered, his laughs seemed fuller. The audience leaned in, unaware of the small weight behind the smiles. I answered each question like I always had. I felt the lightness of a teacher watching her pupils shine. I stilled the grief until it sat gentle in the background like a remembered song. Each cheer felt like a stitch sewing the day into something we could keep. The game moved forward. I felt the time slip toward the moment I had chosen. I felt both the smallness and the vastness of the day. I wanted it to stretch. I wanted every second to hold its breath and keep us safe. The bell chimed for the end of another round. The crowd clapped. My family huddled close. I rested my hands in my lap and breathed deep. The next hour would shape the memory I wanted to leave. I wanted it bright. I wanted it true. I sat thinking of my classroom. I thought of the child who could not tie his shoe until you knelt and showed him each loop. I thought of the student who whispered, "You cared about me," and went on to name a scholarship with those words. I thought of the small lessons that become the large ones. And then, while the cameras rolled through another commercial, I felt the pull to do one more thing. I stood again and walked up to Steve with my secret tucked under my tongue. The moment had come to be seen for what I had chosen. I tapped his arm and he turned. I spoke, calm and soft. I told him the truth. He listened. The show kept its warmth. My family did not yet know the full hour I had set aside for them. I held the rest of the story like a quiet promise. Steve's eyes searched mine after I told him. He didn't blink right away. For a moment, the noise of the studio seemed to vanish. His voice dropped low, meant only for me. "Mrs. Foster, you're saying tomorrow?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. Tomorrow at 10. He breathed out slow, like a man carrying something heavy. Then he straightened his shoulders. "All right," he said. "Then tonight we make it count." The cameras came back on. He didn't tell the crowd what I had said. He kept my trust, but I could feel it in him, in the way his smile lingered a little longer when he looked my way, in the way he guided the game with a softer touch. He carried my secret like it was a flame he was shielding from the wind. We moved into the third round. My grandson buzzed in first. "Name something you bring to a picnic," the question read. He shouted, "Blanket!" and the crowd roared. My family played that board like pros. I clapped and cheered, my laughter ringing out clear and bright. For them, it was just a game. For me, it was a gift. Every cheer was another memory stitched into their hearts. Between questions, Steve tossed jokes at my grandkids, calling them the loudest folks from Nashville. They laughed, their shoulders loose. They didn't know tomorrow would be goodbye. And I wanted it that way. I wanted them smiling, not weighed down by sorrow. Then came the fast money round. My family huddled. Someone suggested Carol should take the final slot. Another pointed to my grandson, but Steve cut in, his voice firm but warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Margaret Foster is going to close this out." The audience erupted. My family looked surprised, but I stepped forward, steady, calm. My feet moved slow but sure. My hands gripped the podium, the way they once gripped a chalkboard when I taught lessons to first graders. The countdown began. Name something teachers do that parents appreciate. "Listen to their children," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Name something people do when they're proud." Smile. Quick. Simple. Name something that gets better with age. Wisdom. Name something children remember about their favorite teacher. They cared about me. I felt the weight of those words. Name. Something that makes life worth living. Love, I whispered. The buzzer sounded. I exhaled, Steve's eyes locked on mine. He didn't say a word at first. He turned the card slow, reading the points aloud. 32, 28, 31, 35, 29. My total rose, 155 points, enough to seal the win with my family's earlier score. The studio erupted. My family screamed, hugging me, squeezing me tight. Tears rolled, but they were tears of joy. They thought I was crying from victory. They didn't know I was crying because this was the perfect ending to my last day. Steve wrapped me in a long embrace, longer than the cameras usually allow. He leaned close, whispering so only I could hear. "Thank you for letting me share this day with you," I whispered back. This was perfect. The crowd cheered. The music played. My family beamed, thinking the game was the prize. But I knew the truth. The prize was the memory, sealed forever. That night, when the taping ended, Steve stayed. He didn't rush off. He sat with me in the green room, asking about my life. I told him about the 43 years in classrooms, about the students who became nurses, firefighters, teachers themselves, about the little boy who once gave me a seashell and said, "For when you miss the ocean?" Steve listened, quiet. His usual jokes were gone. Instead, he nodded, eyes wet at the corners. "You've changed the way I see today," he said. "It's not about how much time we've got. It's about what we do with it," I smiled. That's the lesson I wanted to leave. That night, back at the hotel, my family and I sat close. We ordered pizza. We laughed watching old clips of the show on YouTube. We teased each other about silly answers. No one talked about hospitals. No one talked about endings. Just laughter, warmth, and love. And when the morning came, April 19th, I closed my eyes holding Carol's hand. My last memory was the sound of my family laughing, still carrying the joy from the night before, with the memory of Family Feud not as a game, but as the brightest day of my life. 3 weeks later, the episode aired. By then, my chair sat empty, but my spirit was still moving. Steve Harvey opened the show different that day. The crowd cheered, the lights glowed, the music boomed. But before the first family was introduced, Steve's voice grew steady. He looked straight at the camera, his face softer than usual. "Tonight's episode," he said, "is dedicated to a remarkable woman, Mrs. Margaret Foster. A teacher, a grandmother, a fighter. She reminded us that every single day counts. And though she's no longer with us, her joy and courage will live on." Viewers at home didn't know my secret during the taping. But when Steve shared the truth, when he told them I had chosen Family Feud for my last day, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Millions of people felt the weight of that moment. The broadcast became one of the most watched episodes in years. Not because of the game itself, but because of the message it carried. My answers, wisdom, love, care, sounded different once people knew the story behind them. They weren't just answers. They were a farewell. Letters poured into the studio. Families wrote about how they watched together, how they hugged their parents tighter that night. Teachers shared it in classrooms, showing students that life is about presence, not possessions. Hospice workers played clips in support groups, saying, This is what dignity looks like. My old students started something too. They launched a scholarship fund called They Cared About Me. The name came straight from my fast money answer. It would help future teachers, the ones who knew that the heart mattered more than the test scores. Donations came in from Nashville, Birmingham, Atlanta, even as far as California. Folks I'd never met gave, moved by a story of a woman they only saw on TV for 30 minutes. The Final Wishes Foundation was born around the same time. A group inspired by my episode began helping others plan meaningful last days. They said, "Margaret chose joy. Others should have that chance too." Families now take loved ones fishing, to ball games, to concerts. One last day on their terms, filled with laughter instead of sorrow. And Steve, he carried the torch in his own way. In later shows, when families grew nervous or a child stammered at the podium, he would pause and say, "Don't worry. Every moment matters. Play with your whole heart." Those words carried my lesson forward. My granddaughter Carol told me later, in her own way, that the world hadn't forgotten. She said she couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone saying, "Aren't you related to that brave teacher on Family Feud?" She said strangers cried and hugged her, telling her I gave them courage to face their own losses. My story traveled further than I ever walked myself. Further than my classroom walls. Further than the streets of Nashville. Further even than Atlanta's bright stage lights. It became a story about life, about choice, about how a final day can echo louder than years. When the episode aired, my farewell became bigger than me. It became a mirror for others, showing them that life is fragile but also beautiful, that the last page of a story can be the most powerful one of all. After the episode aired, the world knew my secret. But my family, my Carol, my children, my grandkids, already carried it in their hearts. At first, they struggled. Carol admitted later that when she learned I had signed the papers without telling her the exact date, she felt angry. She said, "Mama, I wanted to be ready." But then her voice softened. "But you gave me a memory of laughter instead of sorrow. And that's the gift I didn't know I needed." My grandson, the one who buzzed in with Blanket, told his college friends about me. He said, "My grandma taught me that courage isn't just fighting to live, it's choosing how you leave." His words spread on campus. Professors invited him to speak in seminars. Students who never knew me carried my lesson with them. At family dinners, my answers from Fast Money became inside jokes. When someone smiled proudly, they'd shout, "That's 28 points, Grandma." If someone solved a problem with patience, they'd laugh, "Wisdom, 31 points." Even the little ones, my youngest grandkids, picked it up. "Love, 29 points," they'd chirp. It stitched my memory into their daily lives, not with tears, but with laughter. One Sunday after church, Carol told her pastor about my choice. He shared it with the congregation, calling it a testimony of grace. People who had been afraid to face their illnesses or speak about death found new courage. A few weeks later, Carol got letters from strangers. One woman wrote, "I watched your mama's episode and decided to spend my last months traveling with my kids. She gave me permission to choose joy." Steve Harvey himself reached out again. He sent Carol a personal letter. In it, he wrote, "Your mother taught me more in one day than most people do in a lifetime. She reminded me that my job isn't just to make people laugh. It's to give them a moment of joy they can carry with them." Carol framed that letter. It hangs in the living room now, right beside my teaching certificate. Over time, grief softened into pride. My family didn't speak of my death as a tragedy. They spoke of it as a finale written with intention. When people asked, "Wasn't it painful to lose her?" they answered, "Of course it was. But she showed us how to live. She left us strong." Carol made a promise at my bedside. She whispered it when she thought I was asleep. "Mama, I'll carry your lesson forward," and she did. She became a volunteer with the Final Wishes Foundation, helping other families shape their last days into celebrations. She told them about me, about Family Feud, about laughter echoing louder than fear. At holidays, my chair stayed empty, but not silent. They would place my old teacher's bell on the table. Before dinner, one of the kids would ring it. Everyone would go quiet. Then they'd share one moment from their year when they chose joy over sorrow. That was my legacy alive in their voices, with my family turning loss into light. My story no longer belonged just to me. It lived in every hug, every laugh, every memory they shared in my name. In the months after my passing, my family thought my story would fade with the memory of that final Family Feud episode. But it didn't. It grew. Clips of the show found their way online. People shared them with captions like, "This is how I want to live my last days," and "She chose joy." Views multiplied. Comments poured in from across the world. Some were simple, "Rest in peace." Others were raw confessions, "I'm dying of cancer." Watching her gave me courage. A teacher in Ohio showed the episode to her students during a unit on decision-making. She wrote to Carol saying, "Your mother gave my class a lesson no textbook could." Students debated the meaning of courage, and many decided to visit their grandparents more often. Hospice workers also noticed. A coordinator from Arizona contacted Carol. "We've started showing your mama's story to families struggling with end-of-life decisions," she said. "It helps them talk openly without fear." Carol agreed to let them use the footage. In training sessions, staff played the clip of me smiling, clutching my scorecard, saying, "This is my finale." Nurses wiped tears, then smiled too. Church groups embraced it. Pastors used my story in sermons about dignity, choice, and faith. One minister called it the gospel of courage, not because I preached it, but because I lived it. Congregations prayed, not for longer days, but for meaningful ones. Even strangers felt changed. Carol once stood in line at the grocery store when a young woman tapped her shoulder. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Was your mama the teacher on Family Feud?" When Carol nodded, the woman's eyes filled. "I lost my grandmother last year. She was so scared at the end. If she had seen your mama, maybe she would have laughed again. Thank you for sharing her." The impact spread farther than we ever imagined. A nonprofit in Canada created a program called Moments That Matter, inspired by my story. Their mission? Help families create joyful memories before goodbye. They sent Carol a plaque, engraved with my name. But the deepest ripple stayed within my family. My eldest granddaughter, who once wanted to study business, changed her major to social work. "Grandma showed me what service looks like," she said. "I want to help people find peace just like she did." My grandson, the one who had buzzed in on stage, started a podcast. Its title, 28 Points of Joy. He interviewed people about their happiest memories, weaving laughter into every episode. Through them, through all those touched by my choice, I lived on. My voice carried beyond that studio, beyond the game, beyond my last breath, with the world embracing my lesson. Life is measured not in years, but in the courage to shape your final chapter with love and laughter. Carol never thought she would become a storyteller. She always saw herself as the quiet one, a listener, someone who supported others but never stood in the spotlight. Yet after I passed, the world kept asking for my story, and she realized she was the only one who could keep telling it. At first, it began small. A local community center invited her to speak about resilience. She hesitated, but her children nudged her. "Mama, Grandma would want this," they said. So she stood on a modest stage in front of 50 strangers, clutching note cards. Her voice shook at first, but when she described how I had walked into that studio with my head held high, laughter in my chest, she found her rhythm. By the time she finished, people were wiping their eyes. They lined up to hug her afterward. One whispered, "I needed this tonight." Word spread. Churches, schools, and organizations began calling. Each time, Carol refined the story. She spoke not only of my game show finale, but of the choices behind it. She talked about honesty in facing death, about the strength of giving loved ones permission to let go, and about how joy is a decision. She shared the moment I told her, "Carol, I don't want my last chapter written by doctors. I want to hold the pen." Soon, bigger invitations came. A regional hospice conference asked her to keynote. Hundreds of nurses, social workers, and chaplains filled the ballroom. Carol stood behind the podium, nervous again. But when she projected my words, "This is my finale," the room fell silent. Many in the audience nodded knowingly, some crying quietly. Afterward, a nurse approached her and said, "I've been in this work for 20 years. Your mother's story gave me new strength. It reminded me why I do this." The ripple widened further when a journalist from a major newspaper interviewed her. The article, titled "The Teacher Who Chose Joy," went viral. People around the world read about an 82-year-old woman who left life not in a hospital bed, but under bright studio lights, laughing with her family. Messages poured in from places Carol had never visited: Australia, South Africa, India. They all said the same thing. She gave me courage. Encouraged, Carol began writing. At night, after the house quieted, she sat with her laptop, piecing together not only my final story, but also the lessons of my whole life. She remembered the way I read to her under the porch light, the way I taught her multiplication at the kitchen table, the way I faced setbacks with steady resolve. She wrote until tears blurred the screen. She titled the manuscript "Finale of Grace." A publisher soon picked it up. When the book was released, families, caregivers, and teachers embraced it. Bookstores hosted readings, where Carol's voice trembled with emotion but always carried strength. People lined up to thank her, some carrying copies already worn with notes in the margins. Carol realized something profound. By telling my story, she was not only honoring me, she was transforming her own life. She discovered her purpose was no longer confined to being a daughter, a mother, or a caregiver. She had become a bridge between the living and the dying, between fear and acceptance, between silence and courage. Carol stepping into her new role, no longer afraid of the spotlight. She carried me with her, every word she spoke echoing the truth that joy can be chosen, even at the end. The momentum didn't stop with the book. What began as Carol sharing my story in small community halls had turned into a growing wave that stretched across states and even oceans. She was no longer just Margaret Foster's daughter. She had become a voice that carried my lesson to people who needed it most. A year after the episode aired, a documentary filmmaker reached out. He had seen Carol's interviews and believed my story could change how the world talked about dying. The project, titled "Every Day Counts," followed Carol as she revisited the Family Feud studio, walked through our old home in Nashville, and spoke at gatherings where my story had touched strangers' hearts. The documentary didn't focus only on my last day, but on the love, teaching, and strength that defined my life. When it premiered at a film festival, people stood and clapped for several minutes. Carol sat in the back, tears streaming, knowing that her mother's voice had reached even further. Television shows began inviting her too. She sat across from anchors on morning programs, sharing with millions what she once thought was too painful to say aloud. Each time she spoke the words, "My mother chose joy," she saw eyes soften, even in the brightest studios filled with cameras. A daytime talk show host leaned forward during one interview and whispered off camera, "That's exactly how I want to go." With dignity, with laughter, Carol didn't stop there. She partnered with the Final Wishes Foundation, which had been born from my story, and launched workshops for families. These gatherings gave people tools to talk openly about death, to plan final days with honesty and courage, and to find beauty in farewells. Nurses and chaplains came too, eager to carry the message into hospitals and hospices. The movement spread online as well. Clips of her speeches gained millions of views. Hashtags began trending, with people around the world sharing their own finale moments, choosing joy, reconciliation, or peace before their last breath. Carol often said she could almost feel me beside her, smiling, whenever she read those stories. Perhaps the most powerful moment came when Carol returned to Atlanta, a year after that Family Feud taping. She stood in the very same studio, this time as a guest speaker. The lights shone down on her as they had on me, but now the stage was hers. Steve Harvey welcomed her with an embrace and told the audience, "Mrs. Foster gave us the most powerful lesson we've ever had on this show. Today, her daughter carries that torch." Carol stepped to the center, looking out at the crowd. She took a deep breath and said, My mother showed us that the last day of your life doesn't have to be sorrow. It can be laughter. It can be family. It can be love. You can choose joy. The studio erupted in applause, louder than she'd ever imagined. By then, Carol realized this was no longer just about telling my story. It had become a movement about life itself, about how we use the days we're given and how we face the ones that will end. Margaret Foster's story shows us that life isn't measured in years, but in moments of courage, love, and joy. She chose laughter on her last day, and so can you. Don't wait for tomorrow. Hug your loved ones, chase what matters, and make every moment count. Share this story, inspire someone today, and live fully while you still can.